of rural New South Wales and one of Australia's most productive agricultural regions. Farm manager Matt Cummins looks after more than 10,000 acres of land here, rearing livestock and growing crops. But to make this a profitable enterprise, the land also needs a helping hand. That's why so many additional native trees have been planted in recent years.
This project here in itself was developed in the early 90s to try and stabilise and lower the salinity table within the local profile.
Tree planting and the additional vegetation has helped to enrich the soil and steady the water supply passing underground. Quality land is essential for keeping his 1,000 head of cattle and 10,000 sheep well fed. And that's largely thanks to sound agricultural practices. But a few thousand kilometres further north in Queensland, it's a different picture. Deforestation has denuded much of the landscape and threatens native wildlife because of beef-driven land clearing.
The current amount of clearing that happens, say, in the state of Queensland is about 500,000 hectares a year, so 500,000 hectares a year, and that's impacting on dozens, if not hundreds, of endangered species habitat.
Now, a new law introduced by the European Union will target deforestation and ban the purchase of overseas beef and other agricultural products unless farmers can prove the meat comes from land that's not been cleared since 2020. And that's worrying some sections of the agricultural community and Australian lawmakers. For the government here in Canberra, this new EU law creates something of a dilemma. Australia is keen to sign a free trade deal with the European Union, and reservations about farm exports could seriously damage those negotiations. Such is the gap between Canberra and the European Union that the government has hinted it's prepared to walk away from the free trade talks. And that hardline stance has the backing of Australia's National Farmers Federation.
Our message to government has been, don't sign an agreement if it's to the detriment of Australian farmers. We want freer trade. We want more liberalised markets. We want more recognition of, the strengths and competitiveness of the Australian agriculture. But what we don't want is for Australian agriculture to be kneecapped by some free trade agreement that doesn't allow us to continue to export and continue to develop here as an industry.
This argument goes to the very heart of the current discussions. Farmers argue that Australia has different agricultural systems and practices because of its geography and climatic extremes. But environmental NGO The Wilderness Society says the new EU law could benefit Australian farmers, most of whom are opposed to deforestation.
I actually think this is a really positive thing for Australian farmers. If we can sort out this issue around land clearing, Australia will be at the front of the queue for selling produce and getting finance from Europe.
Back at Barbara Station, the issue is less about politics and more about good animal husbandry and sound agricultural practices.
Every bit of your income is based upon how you look after your country. Look, we've got to stabilise our entire beings around it. The Australian agricultural sector is strong, it's vibrant, it's backed by passionate people and passionate companies.
It is that fundamental optimism of people like Matt Cummins that keeps Australian farmers going in the face of frequent floods and drought. Now there's another challenge, with the vexed issue of deforestation having to be resolved if Australian agriculture is to gain a foothold in one of the world's richest markets.
The European Union is rolling out a zero-tolerance policy for goods produced in deforested areas. The goal is to reduce the impact European consumers have on the world's forests. The bloc is the second biggest market globally for goods linked to deforestation after China. Latest figures show the EU was responsible for 16% of deforestation associated with international trade, amounting to over 200,000 hectares. A record the EU is not proud of.
The more we wait, the more we will lose. And we are, in the end, as well, guilty about what is happening in certain other zones in the world, because we are consuming coffee, cocoa, meat, soy, and as well palm oil, for example. And those products are produced often on surfaces that have been deforested to make a place for that agricultural land. And they land in our shelves in the supermarkets.
Palm oil, found in everything from shampoo to chocolate spread, is one of the main culprits, representing nearly 34% of the EU's deforestation-linked commodities. Not far behind is soy, representing 32%. With wood, cocoa, coffee and beef all ranging between 5 and 10% of the bloc's deforestation footprint. The EU's new legislation has generated fierce pushback from the world's largest palm producers in Malaysia and Indonesia, who recently sent a delegation to Brussels to voice their concerns. This new law is likely to impact millions of smallholders in both countries. Palm oil producers say the law misunderstands their industry.
It's true that especially in Europe, palm oil has had a negative reputation over a couple of decades, mainly linking it to loss of biodiversity, deforestation, etc. But we see that tide is turning a bit. There's becoming a more nuanced debate also since as a tragic result of the war, Russian war on Ukraine, a lot of companies had to go back to palm oil and realize that it's a good product, that we need that diversity of oils in the market as well. In general, I would say it's a very ubiquitous product. It's a product that's in 50% of all the products you will find in the supermarket.
Elsewhere, there is a degree of caution and confusion about what the new rules might mean for the EU's major trading partners. The UK provides the bloc with more beef than any other country. The EU is a huge market, worth about $2 billion a year. British farming organisations are hopeful that it won't cause too many problems, simply because land hasn't been deforested for agriculture for hundreds of years in the UK. Greater scrutiny on where beef comes from could see the UK improve its market share, but more paperwork could also slow things down and put some producers off. However, speaking to different groups, some have said that until the delegated acts are published, they're unsure if it applies to so-called integrated products. That would include things like beef that has been fed with soy. They're hopeful that the UK is classified as a low-risk country, and therefore checks would occur on only 1% of total exports to the EU. But environmental NGOs are clear that industries that rely on deforestation simply need to clean up their act or face the consequences.
I think it's time for the industry to really clean its supply chain from deforestation, and so yeah, they will have to do it, or they won't have access to the EU market. And if there are checks done by competent authorities, then the companies can get a fine, or even their imports can be seized.
This new law will come into force towards the end of 2024. That gives the industry time to adapt. But lawmakers in Brussels are clear. If it ends up punishing producers that rely on deforestation, well, that is a price worth paying.
The pushback hasn't seemed to have dissuaded the EU, however. There's little question that for Brussels, deforestation must be a thing of the past.
China lagged behind most of the world in exiting COVID lockdowns.
也没有感觉很突然，只是觉得到时候了。
6 months since its borders reopened, is the country really back in business?
The volume of the tourists that we have here in Macau, to be honest, we are better than before that COVID, although the revenue is still far away from it.
China's post-COVID rebound, Wednesday on CNA.
This is Singapore Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Dawn Tan. Tonight's top stories. Ministers K. Shanmugam and Vivian Balakrishnan cleared of any wrongdoing in the rental of state properties in Ridout Road. Investigations found no preferential treatment was given to them. Works undertaken for the properties were also carried out in accordance with general practices, with the cost of additional renovations borne by the ministers themselves. NUS now among the top 10 universities in the world after jumping to 8th in the latest rankings. It's the first from Asia to do so. Harnessing the power of AI, a new tool will allow SGH doctors to better predict surgical risks and improve outcomes for patients. Placing emphasis on student well-being, SIT makes an online course on mental health compulsory as more students sought help during the pandemic.
I'm Lo Kuisu. Also tonight, China chafes at growing defense ties between Washington and Taipei as yet another U.S. delegation visits Taiwan. Plus, they could have faced capital punishment for blocking the Thai Queen's motorcade. Now, 5 activists have been acquitted.
And in Eurasia Business Update, seeking views on financing standards for the early phase-out of coal across the region. Plus, more tech startups are weaving in artificial intelligence into their prototypes, all in the hope of appealing to investors. Two cabinet ministers